people that are really interested. So, thank you. I'm going to quickly introduce everybody. From my right on down, wrong sheet here. We've got Peter Glues. He's director of North American big urban. I'm sorry. He does the big urban clients for design firm and consulting firm Arcadius. And did I pronounce Glues right or is it Glus? It doesn't matter. Okay. Karina Ricks, she's director of mobility and infrastructure at Pittsburgh. We've got Salita Reynolds, a star.
That was an amazing intro, Russ. I want that on every panel. That's
Los
her.
Angeles star. For those who don't know her, she runs the Los Angeles Department of Transportation. And we've got Raphael Gindrat, is it close enough? Okay. With Best Mile, which does software that does kind of the end-to-end behind autonomous fleets. Very important. And Ellie Casson at Waymo, which everybody I'm sure knows, and they're getting ready to actually start deploying a driverless service in Arizona. So what I'd like to start with, and whoever wants to go first, please do. As driverless cars become an increasing part of the environment, how you've got, and these are both represented on stage. We've got private companies, and whose job is to make money, and you've got public officials who serve the public good. I know the private companies also are serving the public good, or they try to, but number one, it's profit that guides them. So there's a little bit of a tension, and I'm wondering if you all could talk about how you can best work together to make sure that the driverless cars are safe, accepted by the public, equitable, et cetera, et cetera. Who'd like to go first?
Wow, we'll just like jump right in. We've got as much. I don't know. I think I might take issue with your question, just the phrasing of it, that the private sector is, also trying to provide the public good. I think that the private sector is first trying to find the market.
Right.
Secondarily, if it happens to have a public good, then that's good. And I know they all have, and just to be controversial, I guess, have statements in their corporate messages about that this is, first for safety and second, but it is a private company. There are investors, there's a bottom line that they're working toward. That's fine. I do think that the onus is on us to articulate what do we want this technology to serve for, how do we create that environment that we want you to come into, what is the solution set that we want you to bring to our city, because left to their own devices, and in Pittsburgh we have left them primarily to their own devices, we'll continue to see a lot of the same use cases that have brought us to this point. And I've said before that this is where we're in the position of having this potentially disruptive technology not disrupt anything at all, when we really desperately need that disruption to happen.
Yeah, I guess I would say as well, just to, yes, amen to all of that. And then also, not all private companies are built the same way. And they do, some of them have statements that end up feeling a little bit like greenwashing when you sort of get in and under the surface. Others of them do have, in a deep way, a shared goal with the public sector. And my challenge and interest is always to find those, because some of them understand the meaning of the word partnership and others do not. And the partnership relies on trust in a relationship. And trust in a relationship is only proven when you go through a difficult moment and you increase your communication and transparency, and you endeavor to find wins, and you really do make each other's worries your worries. And there are companies out there in the landscape that fit that description, because I think one thing that is very evident is that cities will not just be able to regulate our way towards the future we desire. We must have regulatory power in order to amplify the things that we're doing, But we also must figure out a way to partner towards that future. And the trick is finding those companies that understand the meaning of partnership, and then running really hard with them. Because we also have a moment in time, and it'll be a fleeting moment, where we've got private interests coming into the mobility space and investing in it in ways that has not happened in my 20-year career. I would have loved for a Ford smart mobility company to come help me figure out how to put a bike lane on Polk Street in San Francisco when I was in a church basement with 700 angry residents ready to, stone me on the spot. So now we actually have that starting to happen. And how can we lasso it and leverage it, but be extremely mindful of the fact that we, at the end of the day, do have different motivators and different goals, and we require each other in order to succeed.
I agree with that, and I think the beginning of TNCs a few years ago, like Uber and Lyft, have shown a few issues, like all these companies were operating in an industry without any type of regulation, and so they really deployed solutions designed for themselves, for their own interest. Cities now are starting to realize that they don't have to do the same mistake when it comes to autonomous vehicles, so they want to have a bigger role and they want to regulate some things. But as you said, it will be impossible to anticipate everything and to regulate everything. So it's always going to be a partnership and to find a balance, like a win-win situation between public interest for the city and like individual interest for private companies. Also, one challenge is that autonomous vehicle can be used in a lot of different ways. It can be private cars, cool Teslas like level 4 automation, but it's not going to solve any issue in cities, and it might even create more challenges. Or it might be shared services that are part of public transportation, where vehicles are really used in an efficient way. And if you do that, you have a better alignment between cities' interest and maybe traveler interest. And if it's done correctly, also private companies' interest. So I think cities have to explain what type of service do they want to use and to deploy, maybe to give specific authorization, like public transportation, in order to avoid having 20 different companies operating in the same city. But at the end of the day, as you said, it's always going to be a win-win situation, and we have to find a way to partner between private companies and cities.
Ellie?
A few thoughts. I think Karina made a good point about, let's be honest, that companies really are driven by finding their market, making a profit, and I think that that's the case for Waymo today. I will say we're in a slightly unique and very lucky position in that we had 8 years of research and development time when we were part of Google X, where that wasn't the pressure. So we have an unusual foundation, and I think, and we were working at this, I think, long before anyone took it seriously. So it was a different mindset. And at that time, the way Google's projects work, if you're part of the X laboratory, you have to be trying to solve a major societal problem. In our case, it was the fact that almost 40,000 people in America die every year in preventable car crashes that are the result of human error. The problem has to have a technological solution, and then if it's to move out of the R&D stage, then there has to be a commercial application where this could scale. And so we moved from the R&D stage in 2016 and became Waymo at that point once the Alphabet board and powers that be felt that we'd reached a point where we could maybe really bring this to market in a scalable way. So now that pressure is there in a way that it wasn't before. And I think what's really important is that we stick to the core value that got us started on this path, which is to address crashes on America's roadways first. That's where we're testing today in Phoenix and in the Bay Area. Small test programs elsewhere. And then hopefully eventually globally. I think the only thing I'd add on the need for a partnership, the tension between public-private, we personally at Waymo, I can't speak for all companies in the industry, but we can't grow and do what we need to do if we don't have partners in the city. there's just so much that we don't understand. We may be the experts on the AV tech part, but then how it actually interacts with the real world, we need to turn to the people who work with the residents of these cities. So we are very aware that we can't be arrogant about these things. We need to be relatively humble and ask for help on many of the issues that I'm working on, at least.
Great. Peter, did you have anything you wanted to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I would say partnerships are great, but good fences make good neighbors. And I think that there's a lot of overlap between the interests of private companies and the interests of our cities, but there are lots of places where there's not overlap. And, we have lots of examples in this world where public utility work has been privatized, and that's a heavily regulated space. And it takes a lot of effort for those two players to come together and get alignment. It's a very complicated process. I think that's probably the same thing that we probably need to see in cities. I come from a city, New York, where policy has been light and policy has been in some ways established by TNCs. So, I think the cities have to sort of take that role they have, that right they have, and leap ahead. And I think a good model of this, frankly, is the development model. Like if you're a city and you have a plot of land, a brownfield, you can offer it up to the market and you can say, my principles are I want to see this and this and this and this, and you can put some specificity on it. It doesn't have to take a 200-page document. And then let the market go to work to try to integrate your principles into their offerings, and you'll probably get all development proposals have a wide range of responses, but the city benefits from the confusion sometimes that creates, learns from it, and puts the market to work so the market thinks in some ways for the city. I think that's a great example to think about mobility, to throw out, it's not the plot of land, but it's the street, right? And to think about how that thought process doesn't have to be, if the city's burdened to come up with perfect policy ahead of the technology, it's a really difficult place, right?
Yeah, an interesting thing about that is how things could become very chaotic very quickly. You've got companies like Uber that came in and basically got where they were by cramming into the environment and not worrying too much about the laws, getting the public on their side, and then having the governments accommodate them. The same thing is happening with scooters, et cetera. So how do you balance not stifling innovation with trying to discourage kind of a Wild West mentality, which will be much more dangerous potentially with driverless cars than with the ride-hailing companies or the scooter companies?
I can offer a response?
Sure.
But I don't want to monopolize. No. I mean, the government can say, here's my neighborhood. I'm going to offer this neighborhood, this couple 100,000 customers, and I want to see a TNC response that provides an entire ecosystem, that provides some type of control system that controls autonomous as well as human-driven. Put the burden on the private sector to integrate as a consortium and come back and provide that response. I don't think that's stifling. I think that's actually challenging them to think in the right way about a full solution that integrates the city's priorities.
Good.
I don't know. I guess given that we're in the middle of a kind of extraordinary housing crisis in California and really explosions of homelessness all up and down the West Coast, I'm not sure that the land development model has necessarily worked completely. And I think that that's for a few different reasons. But one of them is cities figuring out the correct levers. And when we get into this space, from my perspective, the correct levers really start with the city thinking more like a product company. We will never be a product company, but we need to think more like one. So, the way that Google and Apple invite innovation on their platforms is that they have terms and services that companies agree to, and then they can sell their products in the App Store. And as soon as they violate those terms and conditions, they're out of the App Store, right? And we have kind of in cities tried to regulate the device, the thing that showed up, instead of thinking, how can we put ourselves in the correct seat around the business model? Because those companies are opening up their apps in our app store, but we don't have terms and conditions, right, that allow them both certainty and consistency, which are incredibly important from a business case perspective.
Right.
If you have your product team build to one set of sort of terms and conditions, that's obviously a huge savings. And you know, we don't have that. And so in Los Angeles, we've been thinking about how can we behave more like a product company to invite innovation on our platform, but express our policy through technology. So when we published our mobility data specifications with the arrival of dockless electric scooters and bikes, we did that with a very intentional eye towards not setting up something that is going to be peculiar to scooters and bikes, but setting up the beginnings of a really a digital version of our current infrastructure that we can then use to manage everything from a scooter all the way up to an autonomous vehicle or things in the sky, or in the case of Los Angeles, new things in tunnels that are being built under our city. So, you know, that's a different way of doing business as government. And that's also us not necessarily trying to regulate our way out of this, but trying to create a new playbook that allows us to continue to do what we do best, which is to deliver infrastructure and to manage the city.
Well, for you and for Karina, how do you innovate in a situation where you've got government bureaucracies that have been around for a long time, you've got dissociated political power, and there's a lot of pressure to keep public transportation systems the way they are. What can you give? What can public transportation give up so that there's more bottom-up innovation rather than just do command and control?
So I don't know that there's a lot of pressure to keep public transportation the way it is right now. I think, you know, we've heard it said before that in some ways it's a failed business model, right? That, you know, the level of quality that it's serving right now is not where we'd want it to be. That's why we're seeing a lot of these other mobility innovations come around it. So I think it is a time to rethink, what do you do best? What is your best place in this network? How can we really optimize that function that you serve? How do we then allow, to Salita's point of being the app store, it's not just the digital platform of the app store, but it's our cities themselves is that, you know, place. And where do you come and fit into that in the overall kind of level of service that we're trying to give to our people, whether it's, you know, through this mode or that mode, but having a clear vision, having a clear set of engagement rules about when you come here, this is what we expect in your service to the public. So, you know, part of it, there is a lot of bureaucracy. We haven't let that stand in our way. LA hasn't let that stand in its way. You know, a lot of that is giving the space to innovate, and then figuring out, you know, what are those rules that we need you then to conform with after we actually know, to your point of, it's hard to put the rules in place when you don't know what the product is. Well, let's see the product, let's see what it can do, and then let's work out together how we're going to have you fit into that.
Good.
Yeah, we've had to do some really push the envelope quite a bit on hacking procurement, for example. I think if you looked at the glacier under the water for why innovation doesn't happen as often in government as it should, procurement would be one of the primary hurdles to that. And there are reasons for procurement rules, because there needs to be a high bar when you're spending the public's money. But when those procurement rules frustrate the ability of government to manage towards a public good, and then you have to figure out workarounds and other ways of doing things. So instead of putting out requests for proposals that might take 2 years, we instead went out and pre-qualified about 100 product and manufacturing companies to be able to work with us under a task order solicitation process, which happens in a matter of weeks. So I can use that, and I can iterate with that, and I can issue dozens of projects and products in a time, same time period it would have taken me to just do one before. There are really boring and unsexy regulatory hacks that are fundamentally necessary in order to do what you're talking about. But the other one is to go out and to find non-traditional partners and bring them into government. So we didn't just, wake up yesterday and figure out how to behave like a product company. We went out and brought some people that had product company background in to be strategic advisors. It would never have occurred to me to host a developer conference. I have no idea what a developer conference even is 6 months ago. But we did it on Wednesday, and the first one that I'm aware of that a Department of Transportation has hosted, because we're trying to get to a new way of doing innovation. Instead of sitting through 400 product pitches, where the city is so far downstream that by the time somebody walks into my office and wants to sell me something, it's fully baked. It probably is ignorant. To Ellie's point, nobody has sort of said, hey, I might not actually understand what the real problem is and why this doesn't happen the way I think it should. And it doesn't actually, it just doesn't work for a variety of reasons. So how can I get cities into the product design work stream? How can we be co-designers and co-collaborators in the way products come to life in a market?
How does the way federal government, federal money is allocated for mass transit systems get in the way of being able to do that?
Oh, was that a softball? I think that, under the previous administration, you saw USDOT doing a lot of things to try and loosen up some of the color of money restrictions that come whenever you accept 1 penny of federal money. All of these requirements kick in that make it incredibly difficult to do anything except for deliver the status quo. And so, there were some attempts to kind of loosen that up. That seems to have faded a bit in the last couple of years. And so, we have to then figure out how do we rethink the business model so that we can, in cities, have a sustainable way to fund our transportation infrastructure that doesn't rely on things like the gas tax or the sales tax, which are regressive and also heavily tied to the economy, so not super reliable. And also get ourselves out of this position that we're now in. I mean, we were talking this morning on the panel with Phil Washington that we can't just overnight replace our entire fleet of transit buses with electric buses because of the federal rules governing the money we use to buy those buses in the first place.
Right. Ellie, you were...
I was just going to make a small point on the previous question and conversation around the cities thinking more like a product company. I think tech companies also have to get a little more comfortable having conversations that make them vulnerable. It's a work in progress at Waymo, but one that I feel really fortunate is, I'm being met with receptivity at the leadership level and a lot of curiosity and enthusiasm from the technical side of the team. And I like bringing members of our product team to meetings with policymakers because there are things they can answer that I can't. And they go back with new ideas. We've gotten a little bit of flack at Waymo for starting our testing in a pretty suburban area. And some of our competitors have focused on cities straight out of the gate. But one of the things that is really nice about working with a smaller community is how very easy it is to reach the people that have the answers you need. And so shout out to some of the small communities, smallish communities in Arizona that we've been working with, City of Chandler, Mesa, Tempe. I frequently put our engineers and product staff directly in touch with their transportation engineers and let them have the conversation that they need to have. Occasionally it makes me a little nervous. I don't know what they go off and talk about, but it's helped us. It moves things along. And it gives cities more trust in us that we are asking questions and looking to them for answers. So just as I think you're trying to get cities to be a little more open-minded about the way you approach some problems, we need to get more comfortable about making ourselves vulnerable and asking questions.
Right. So teaching product companies to think more like cities too, at the same
Right.
time,
Both
and also
directions.
putting more women in charge, because vulnerability is not maybe a top line value of Silicon Valley at the moment.
No, I mean, I want to piggyback on that too. Is that, you know, I was talking with one of our AV companies actually, you know, here during this conference, and saying had invited them to come and workshop with us. You know, if we want to put these guide rails out there of like, what is the public good that we want you to help solve? You know, we're throwing the doors open and saying, come and workshop with us. We want to talk about it. Don't bring your lawyers. Please don't bring your lawyers, because I'm going to have to bring mine. Don't bring your lawyers. You know, and then I'm hearing from, you know, kind of the secret birds whispering like, they're terrified to meet with you. I'm like, why are they terrified to meet with me? They all want to know, what does Karina want from this? Like, and they're trying to like get their ducks in a row before. And I'm like,
true.
I have no idea what I want from this. I'm just inviting you to come into this conversation. But there's a terror on both sides of it, that like somehow we're going to, you know, put the handcuffs down on them. And mandate what's happening, but at the same time we're like, oh, they're secretly meeting and trying to like, you know, circumvent our goals.
I think there's ownership on both sides to that problem. And again, I think tech companies would serve themselves better by being more open. There's so many reasons why that's challenging. So I'm not trying to belittle that. But then one of the things that we find is challenging from what we hear from cities that scares us, but it's partly our fault as well, is we want your data, we want it all, and there isn't any nuance there. We, a tech company then...
Except in LA and Pittsburgh, where it's super nuanced.
Certain cities are... Yes, make more specific asks than others, and that's very appreciated because it helps us understand why. What do you need? What are you trying to accomplish? If you tell us what you're trying to accomplish, we might be able to say, that's actually very simple, or it's not, and here's why. And then you might say, okay, that's reasonable, and maybe there's a workaround. So, but we never get to that point in the conversation because we're too afraid of each other to talk. So the ask is made, it's a big ask, the answer is no, and then that's it.
Yeah, and the data itself obviously has value for planning and infrastructure, and you know, everybody's been, you know, data. But the real thing that cities need to be able to do is to continue to manage the public realm and deliver services. And so, you know, the way that we do that digitally is, you know, we may earn data as an outcome of that allows us to build better tools or to go out in the market and to kind of, you know, see if the market can build better tools to do things like pricing or, you know, traffic management or whatever it is. But the data conversation, I think, it was really tough when Uber and Lyft came into cities, and cities didn't know. It got to this piece about trust and transparency. We didn't even know what was going on, and so we were like, just give it all to us, right? And it wasn't helpful, and it actually didn't end up advancing anybody's goals. And so we needed
Travis's goals.
No comment. We needed to go through that experience to learn as well.
But it's also about multimodality, because just Uber and Lyft data might be useful for other TNCs, but you can also use the same data for other types of transportation solution and vice versa. If Uber and Lyft or Waymo have access to existing public transportation data, they might make on-demand transportation more efficient, and also on the other side. And I think we have to keep in mind that cities are a really complex ecosystem. Public transportation system on itself will not solve all the problem. Self-driving car will not do the same. So it's always a combination where we have a multimodal offering, and this multimodal offer will make much more sense for a city. One mode of transportation will not solve all the issue in a given city.
Good. So my wife's parents are in their mid-80s. They can't wait for driverless cars to get here. They're coming, but over the near-term future, the next 2 or 3 years, what are the big challenges to deploying driverless cars?
Backing up, handling snow. I mean, Waymo can probably, help us with some of these. I mean, it's not, I was, joking earlier that, people get so exercised about this that, it's coming, it's just right there, we have to get ready. And I'm thinking, there's a lot that still needs to happen here. We do need to get ready for it because, we're notoriously slow in our ability to act on these things. But there's a lot of steps between here and there. We were talking earlier about there isn't even a common sort of understanding of what autonomy means, that there's the different grades of it, but how do we manage each one of those grades? We're so focused on level 5 autonomy where everything's gonna, be going on its own. Level 3 scares the crap out of me.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that I give a lot of credit to Waymo because they've been so considered and they've been so thoughtful and kind of grounded. And, I don't see Waymo sort of popping off in the press about, how driverless cars are here and they're being deployed and pushing in that way. Right. And I think that gives people a wrong sense of where the tech actually is.
That's a real big problem, and it's one of the issues I wanted to come to. And in my experience, Waymo is at least as good and probably better than the other companies in terms of a focus on safety. Statistics can't prove yet, and probably won't be able to for a long time, whether these cars are safer. My gut and experience tells me they will be safer. However, the technology is developing. You're talking about snow. There's all kinds of issues in the technology, and the biggest problem that everybody, including Waymo, is going to face is edge cases that are kind of bizarre, like the Uber car that just, without putting on any brakes at all, ran through and killed a person. So there are going to be deaths from driverless cars, even if the statistics prove that they're far safer. In the meantime, the media, will blow them up huge. There's going to be a big, I think there's going to be a big public relations problem as these things become deployed, because there are going to be tragic accidents. So how, whether it's from the city's point of view, everybody wants this to happen and wants it to happen safely. How do you deal with that public relations challenge?
Well, I think the first challenge we want to deal with is the actual safety challenge, right? And that to me, even though I understand why from a business case, anybody working on an AV stack cannot say that they're expecting that their AV will rely on city infrastructure, because that's basically telling the street that they can only proceed at the speed of infrastructure, innovation, and connectivity. And once you throw that level of government and uncertainty and risk into things, it becomes really difficult to make the case. But I believe firmly that edge cases in cities are pretty endless. And without having infrastructure in the product workflow and in the discussion, it will be really challenging to have unfettered autonomy that proceeds in a way that actually does advance our shared safety goals. And I do believe that those are shared goals, particularly with a few companies. I don't actually think that a car encountering a person crossing the street at night should count as an edge case. Right. And the decisions that Uber made about how to deploy their driverless tech in that Volvo were really business decisions that had to do with litigation and other things. So it's also important to know that companies won't be able to, we won't be able to rely on companies uniformly self-policing in order to get to a safety goal. And then when it comes to the messaging, when Vegas deployed their sort of keyless vehicle, and the very first day there was a crash, they had to immediately, nobody was hurt, which is great, but they had to immediately figure out, how do we reassure the public that this is being done in a thoughtful way? Because now government is sharing risk, right? If we want to invest in directing these services to solve real problems, then we're going to start sharing that risk and that conversation. So another thing that we ought to think about and talk about is, how does that happen in the other fleet of semi-autonomous vehicles right now, which is commercial aviation? You don't buy a ticket on American Airlines because of its 5-star crash rating. It is not a feature that is tribal that companies compete on in the sky, because you have to reassure the public that it's safe if you wanted the jet age to happen.
Right.
And I think that is another sort of way to change the discussion in the terms of the messaging on safety, to reassure the public that it is safe. There needs to be a different foundational starting point among companies working on AV stacks to share safety as, a necessary thing that the whole industry has to take on together if we're going to get to any kind of market or business case for this in the future.
Good. Peter?
And I just add to that, right, the safety discussion is a vehicular-based conversation, but as we get down the road on this technology, and we want to see large-scale harmonization of traffic flows, we're going to have platforms that are stacked onto these vehicle technologies. And the platforms themselves will then begin to take responsibility for movement of autonomous and non-autonomous vehicles, and the safety conversation becomes multi-layered and gets more responsible. And because the government actors are probably purchasing those platforms to control movement, everybody has responsibility all of a sudden.
Right.
So I agree. It's a more, we're not there yet in the conversation of safety, but I think in a couple of years, it'll become more complex.
But it's also a matter of transition period. First, we will need a way to test and validate the software stack inside the vehicle in order to decide what is safe and what is not safe. But on the other side, we have to be realistic. These kind of vehicles will not be able to drive anywhere, at any condition, at any time. So the transition period will be long. And at some point, we are going to end up with hybrid fleets, where we are going to have autonomous vehicle working together with non-autonomous vehicle in the same transportation ecosystem. And I agree with you, we will need this kind of platform on top of that, enabling cities or transportation operators to run such mobility solution. And it's one of our goals at Best Mile to be an enabler for this kind of transition. But I think what Waymo is doing, deciding and selecting really specific use cases, specific places, is a really good approach, and they do it at quite big scale. But on the other side, I also agree with you, all the players are not doing the same. And in this kind of market, you also have players doing a little bit of overselling.
Anybody else on that one? So we have a few minutes. Would any of you like to ask another panel member a question? Don't have to. We can turn to the audience if...
It's too late in the day for that.
Okay, anybody in the audience have questions for our panel? You can turn the lights on so I could see. That'd be great.
Hi, Paul Salama at Clear Road. Question for the city folks. The LA, Pittsburgh have some levers. Salita, as you mentioned that you in LA have a lot of power as a city. Most cities in the country don't necessarily have that power. In potential cases, they've been taken away actually from at the state level, as Meg Merritt mentioned yesterday. You have preemption in several states at the AV level. So I guess the question is, where do you see your role as a city leader, as a leading edge city to the rest of the country?
I mean, it's true that we don't have a whole lot of authority, direct authority, to be able to say, yes, this vehicle, no, that vehicle, in our cities. But we do have sort of the court of public opinion, and I think that that's something that the cities are going to be stepping up and using more and more, is that, we are obligated to protect the residents of our cities. That's why we have government, that's why we have public officials. If we are not stepping up there and not kind of we do need to have that shared responsibility as well, that if you're in my city and I let you be in my city, there is a bit of ownership that I have to take over that as well, whether we actually take an overt stance on that or don't. And so we are going to take an overt stance, and we're going to tell you what our thresholds for safety are, what our expectations are, the degree of partnership that we expect from you to be there. And so, there is a level of preemption that is inherent in what we're doing, but we also need to step forward and be very articulate and very forthright in what it is that we expect from you being here in our cities, particularly in this sort of nascent testing evolutionary stage.
Yeah, I would say in terms of the question about what's our role as a leader in space, it's first and foremost to educate, right? The biggest hurdle, I think, to all of this will be the level of understanding and sophistication of the people who sit in our seats and policymakers, sort of in cities around the world. And that, focusing in on can there be, the same way that we developed and deployed a curriculum around the Complete Streets movement, for example, to really help cities understand what that is, how to bring that into design, what the wins are when you can do that. We have to do that in this space too. And so looking to organizations like NACTO, some of the organizations that are here, UITP, ITF, to sort of take on that challenge of helping cities understand what it means to think more like a product company. I think that is a role for leadership to take on. And then I think that we have a tremendous convening power. So there's a lot of questions about the future of the mobility data specifications that we published. If you've got cities that are now saying, oh, that's great, I want to bring that in and use it in my city, but is it okay that LA now is writing code? We have to convene cities outside and very quickly get to a place where that encyclopedia set of reference code that can be the sort of digital duplicate or the stack that sits on top of the AV stacks in the future really does become global. And I don't think you need every city, but I think you need a few leaders to step into that space and say, now we're going to have a shared responsibility in governance of the technology. And that's a role for leadership as well, because I think that the accusation that innovation cannot occur if there is a patchwork of regulations is valid, but it does not mean that there isn't a solution to that. And that requires the cities to lean in and rely on our current powers, because I actually disagree a little bit that, while there is variance among cities for what you can do, almost every city has the power to put in a stop sign. Almost every city has the power to put in a traffic signal and to operate that traffic signal. So that means every city is controlling movement right now. And the way we do it is very clumsy. It's with traffic cones and traffic officers and paint and those kinds of things. We just want to retain the ability to do that, but do it through a digital lens and an analog lens.
Can I add something? I know your question was directed at the cities, but a couple of quick thoughts. So the first cities that it's going to take time for autonomous vehicles to arrive in all cities. So the two you have represented here are sort of, have an early opportunity to set the tone. And so just that tone setting, I think, is really powerful. And I haven't worked with Pittsburgh directly, a little bit more with Los Angeles. And I just think that what I see we're here in LA, is an eagerness to find solutions to really complex problems. And then identifying the goals. It's true that the laws that regulate autonomous vehicles or vehicles in general, the cars themselves, are primarily passed at the federal level, the rules of the road mostly at the state level, though of course cities do retain some control. But to what Karina said, I mean, there's also just the political reality on the ground, the cultural reality on the ground. I think a lot about that. You don't need a law to make a private company's experience very difficult when you come to a city, or collaborative and positive and smooth. So the tone that cities are taking, I think is really important. And having clearly defined goals of their own. I get asked all of the time, what is Waymo going to do to congestion? What is Waymo going to do to this, to that, to this? And frankly, my answer is, I don't know, do you have a vision? Does your city already have a vision or a plan for some of these things? Because it's probably going to look a lot like what your current vision looks like. Whatever we bring to the table is going to be a reflection of the vision that you have set for yourself. We're not going to radically alter your path if you have a clearly defined path. And we're eager to, where possible, supplement and help cities reach those goals. One of the things that happened this year that I was most excited about was really small in a way, but we signed our first contract with a public transit provider to be the first last mile provider to the Valley Metro transportation stops. So public transportation in Arizona. Now you can take a Waymo there. And so anyway, just saying, like, I think it's ultimately up to the cities.
Good.
Yeah.
We're almost done here. Peter had a question for Salita.
No, it's just a comment. I did go to the developers conference. I thought it was awesome. I love the fact that MDS is being done and modified through GitHub. I mean, very collaborative. It's really accelerated. I guess my question is, I mean, in many ways, by creating MDS, you're establishing a platform. And what's your dialogue like with other cities? Because you're certainly first to that conversation. You've got seems like the horsepower to get it done. How is that conversation? Because some cities are probably saying, I'm going to adopt this, and some cities are going to say, it's a little bit different from my situation. What's that like?
So I think there are a ton of questions, right? Because cities may have their technical folks. They know what they're looking at, right? When they see that we're doing it on GitHub, which means we're doing it in open, and they're excited by it, but their commissioners or their electeds may not really understand it completely and are a little worried about it. And so there's that kind of learning curve that it just requires time. And what is true about cities is that we do trust each other. And so, it is valuable to have a city leading and leaning into that conversation, which is different than, I'm watching, sitting from the sidelines and just watching with fascination what's happening in Toronto with Sidewalk, right? So you have maybe a similar sort of idea or goal about how to shape a city and how to use technology to get great outcomes, but you have a private company that is leading that conversation. And so there's not the same level of trust because there's not an immediate, recognition that we know. I mean, Karina and I know what it feels like to sit in our seats, and so we're not going to give each other crappy advice, right? But the other thing is, so tremendous curiosity, but trust and opportunity, and a real desire to push. To raise that umbrella so that cities can come in and start actually influencing the governance of that technology and doing that, keeping that in open, and also being very transparent about the goals, which are things like it's got to be built in open, it cares a great deal about privacy and transparency and data, it cares about avoiding monopolies, and it aims to avoid monopolies. Those kinds of things, there's a really pressing need because we are sort of, to go back to airplanes, we're building the airplane while it's flying in the air. I mean, we thought MDS we would have a luxurious, year and a half or 2 years to build it. Scooters showed up and we had a month, right? So you're watching us figure it out in real time and in public. And I think that there's a way to take advantage of all of the really good things that can come when you do it that way.
So, no, I was just going to say, I mean, as one of the cities who's looking at MDS and saying, great, I will take that, adapt it for our own uses and apply it. And I think that we're finding that in any number of arenas where there's just this level of innovation is changing so rapidly that we don't have the luxury. If this is good enough, I'm going to take that because there's 17 other things that I need to be working on. And, maybe she'll steal something from us and we'll grab it from Kansas City. I mean, we're all trying to kind of catch up. And so, we're not waiting, letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. If we've got a good product here, we'll take that and just keep amplifying that further.
Great. Thank you all. This is really fantastic. A really good conversation. Much appreciated.